What may be of interest to all of you as Rotarians is that this year, Jay was the executive producer of the television program, Thon, 50 Years for the Kids. The program won the ratings race in its primetime slot in tiny markets like New York and Philadelphia. He may not take credit for this, but I'm sure that Jay's determination to make a great show and get it into where the right high viewership areas are that it landed in were very much responsible for the 50th year of Thon raising a record amount of money, over $13.7 million that went towards the fight against childhood cancer. Not a very bad community service project that he took part in there. I'm happy that the Nittany Lions are undefeated so far this year, which is a big help on two fronts. One, Jay will not have to field many questions about poor play and coaching changes. And two, it keeps a high ceiling for ratings for the October 29th Penn State-Ohio State game, which coincidentally airs on Fox 43. It is with great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Jay Paterno.
Chris, don't be afraid to promote Fox 43 if you get a chance. Thanks for asking me to come down here. Chris, I don't know, it was two years ago, we hatched this idea to start this Nittany Game Week show. I called Tom Bradley, called Todd Sadowski, and we met with Chris. And the first week last year, we were literally putting the wings on the plane as we were broadcasting a show, so to speak. But their support's been great. The show's been a lot of fun, and hopefully you do watch it. It is a lot of fun. But let me get into what we're here to talk about. We'll talk a little about leadership and as well as name, image, and likeness. So I'll start with the leadership part of it. We'll get a name, image, likeness, and certainly I know there's going to be a lot of questions about those things. You know, every day you turn on the news. You pick up a newspaper for those of us that are old enough to still read a newspaper, and I'm one of them. And we are indeed in some strange times in America. You know, we live in a time when the idea of leadership, we don't even agree on that, of what leadership is and what the ideal is. And we have people who believe that the ideal form of leadership is an uncompromising pursuit of all or nothing. Many see leadership as vengeful or braggadocious about spiking the ball in the end zone when in the face of a competitor. Many of us have fallen sway to the idea that we're looking for the following things in a leader: never admit faults, never admit mistakes. When cornered with facts to prove you're wrong, change your explanation and offer different excuses. And never admit that you lost. Despite all evidence to the contrary, just keep repeating that you never lost. That's what passes for leadership for many people these days. And that's tragic. People of vision, people who would lift others up and guide others for the common good, do not reside in places built on that false foundation and those shifting sands. This club is exactly what this country needs more of. The idea of service over self. People don't think of that as leadership anymore. True leadership, enduring leadership, has never been braggadocious. It's never been vengeful. It's never sought to get served. It's been about serving others. That is the place where the experience of both success and failure become the bedrock where we build excellence. And excellence, I was raised in a house with very visionary parents. My mom probably doesn't get some of the credit she really deserves for the things she's done with her life. But my dad told us many, many times, he had a philosophy that excellence is internal. It's in here and it's in here. It is that which we must value most, is excellence. Success is how other people see you, perceive you. Excellence is a truth of who you are and what you are. See, we can fool people into believing that we're a success. We can brag about things. We can buy fancy cars, big houses, and just fill up social media with a stream of cheery, always happy posts showing that we're always living our best lives. but those things are hollow. Excellence is a journey. It is certainly doing difficult things, but excellence is enduring because it must be attained over time. It is also overcoming or learning from mistakes. It's putting ego aside for the common good. In football, in 22 years of coaching, sometimes it means putting your ego aside and doing things for the team. And then when you make mistakes, you learn from them. So in 2002, we played at Ohio State. Ohio State won the national championship that year. They shouldn't have. We should have beaten them. They were undefeated. They had a very good football team. We went out there, and that year we had a really good offensive football team, and I was calling plays on offense. And we were used to going up and down the field. And so you're always the mindset, we're going to be full speed all the time. When the course of that game, Ohio State was a really good defensive football team, as were we. And we had a 3rd and long in our own end. And Ohio State was struggling on offense against our defense. And it was 3rd and about 15. I said, let's get after it. Let's get this first down. Come on, we got to keep the foot on the gas. We got to keep going. And our quarterback rolled out, threw a pass. Chris Gamble, I can still see him going down their sideline. He picks the ball off. They score a touchdown. They beat us 13-7. And the fact that I wanted to keep putting my foot on the gas, I ignored the fact that had we run a draw and punted the ball, you as fans would have all been like, oh, they ran the ball. But we would have punted Ohio State down on the other end, and they never would have scored against us. We would have won the game. So when I came home that night and the next day looked at the film and thought about the entire global picture of what was going on in that game, my ego may have gotten the better of us, may have cost us a game. Certainly there are 20 plays in a game like that you could point at, but that one jumped out at me and stuck with me the rest of my career. And in 2005, we played Ohio State at home. And again, really good offensive football team. But we made up our minds that either our kicker or our punter was going to be on the field at the end of every possession. We were not going to turn the ball over because we had a great defensive football team, and we were going to let them make the big mistake. And sure enough, second quarter, Troy Smith goes back to pass from their own end, throws a pick. We run it down about the 5-yard line, and we score, and we win the game 17-10. Now, would I have liked to have scored 40 points? Yeah. But we understood, and we had a number of 3rd and longs in the second half where we did not put our defense in a bad position. I had to literally subvert my own ego for the good of the team. There are other times we had to score a bunch of points and win games, but that's what you learn from. And that's what that's a sign of leadership, when you're mature enough to understand what you need to do. 2011, which was the last season Joe coached, he started the season telling us on offense, look, we've got a great defense. We've got a great kicking game. We're young on offense. We're going to be careful with the football. We're not going to worry about what statistics we pile up. We're going to make sure that we're in a position to win the game in the 4th quarter. And as many of you know, 9 weeks into that season was when Joe was fired. We were 8-1 at that point. We had lost. The only game we had lost was the eventual national champion, Alabama. But we won 3 or 4 games in the 4th quarter because he knew exactly what we had. He told us what we needed to do, and we had to play the role that we had to play. And that was leadership. Certainly it led to criticism. Some of you probably felt we should have been scoring 40 points a game. But at the end of the day, it's about what's good for the team and what enabled us to win games. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many stats you pile up. The result that matters is the W or the L when it comes to football. And doing what is right and being willing to play the long game was part of that. I can tell you, I got emails, I got calls, I got things about why we weren't doing this that year, why we weren't doing that. But you know what? If you know you're right, you play the long game. Abraham Lincoln led this country that way. There was a book called Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, one of the great books on leadership you can ever read. And in 2008, I was reading it, my dad said, hey, have you heard about this book called Team of Rivals? And one of the reasons that I started to read it was at that point, in 2008, I was a surrogate speaker for the Obama campaign. And that book was making its way around everybody. Everybody in that campaign was talking about that book. And certainly President Obama had read it. My dad had read it. I had read it. But if you look at the way my dad led, very similar to that idea of Lincoln. His leadership, even, regardless of whether you agree with policies that President Obama had, his leadership was generally very thoughtful, very deliberate, maybe too slow sometimes, but it was the same kind of unemotional leadership, very similar to what my dad was. And one of the things in that book, one of the things Lincoln did was when he would get angry at somebody, he would sit down and write a letter. Obviously, this is before email. He would write a letter and he'd put it in a drawer overnight. And the next morning he'd take the letter out and he'd read it. If he still felt the same way, he would then send it on. But far more often than not, he would rip the letter up. My dad had a rotary phone. Now, for those of you who are under 30, a rotary phone has a dial on it, and you have to dial all the numbers. And finally, at one point, AT&T said, look, we don't service rotary phones anymore. You have to give the phone up. And there was a reason he wanted a rotary phone. He would get angry, as Italians do on occasion, and get emotional, as Italians do on occasion. But by having a rotary phone, by the time he dialed the 10th number, he generally had calmed down and would put the phone down and think about what he was about to say. And those are little things, but the ability to remain calm comes from an inner confidence. When you know that you're right, and when you know that you're doing the right thing, it comes from that inner peace of knowing what excellence is and how it manifests itself. The first year I coached quarterbacks at Penn State, Rashard Casey was getting ready to start. And in May of that year, he was accused wrongly of being involved in an altercation back at home in Hoboken, New Jersey. And Rashard Casey was a black man in Hoboken, New Jersey, accused of getting involved in a racial incident and beating up an off-duty white police officer. The story went all over the country. I knew Rashard from when we recruited him. My dad knew it. There was intense media pressure for us to kick him off the team. Now, he'd been charged, had not been convicted. When we sat down with Rashard and we talked to his lawyer and attorney, we started to understand the whole picture. This police officer was off duty. He was with someone he was not supposed to be with. Okay, I'm sure his wife really enjoyed that part of it. But Rashard was falsely accused. In fact, years later, he won a high six-figure lawsuit against the Hoboken Police Department. And that's not to get into politics of police. This is one incident. But the important thing was, amid an avalanche of hate-filled letters, certainly to Rashard, but also to me and to Joe for standing by him, amid an avalanche of media people calling Joe a hypocrite and calling us hypocrites for sticking by him, amid all that for months until he was cleared in November, Joe knew inside what was right. I, as his coach, knew inside what was right. It probably cost us some games because it took us a while to figure out how to get Rashard focused the way we needed to get him to focus amid all this. But at the end of the day, when my dad passed, we found notes from that season. And he said, you know what? He wrote in it, if I have to lose a couple, if it costs us some games to stand up to something that is not right, that's something I'm willing to do. That was in his notes. He didn't say that publicly. He didn't want everybody to say, look at me. But it was that inner peace, that inner confidence that he had to do the right thing. You know, he kept a quote on his desk till the day he died. It was from Lincoln. It said, I do the very best I know how, the very best I can, and I mean to do so until the end. If the end brings me out all right, what is said against me won't amount to anything. If the end brings out angels swearing I was right, it would make no difference. It echoes something that John Adams once said, no matter how high or low my estimation in the eyes of the world, my conscience is clear. That's what excellence is about. That's what leadership requires. Not impetuous rantings on social media or berating others or angry tantrums. We live in a time when winning on Twitter seems to mean a great deal to many people, small people. The braying jackasses of social media add nothing to this country. They do not advance our nation's march towards a more perfect union. And though social media is new in human history, leaders have always had to suffer the slings and arrows of fools. Thousands of years ago was written in the book of Proverbs, stone is heavy and sand a burden, but a fool's provocation is heavier than both. In the Quran, it says, rather walk with modest pace and talk in gentle tone. Surely the most repugnant of voices is the braying of the donkey. But it's hard when people criticize you not to return fire. It takes restraint and control not to get into a Twitter fight. It goes back to advice that I used to hear from my dad all the time. So whatever you do, don't get in a pissing contest with a skunk. And when you think about it, the skunk will always outstink you. The skunk has nothing to lose. And generally, most of the people that are out there doing these things, they have more time to spend on it because they have nothing to accomplish. And one of the things I dislike most about social media, there's a lot of funny stuff, cute puppy videos, you name it. That stuff's great. But the one of the things I dislike the most is how people feel the need to get into the back and forth and to boast and taunt someone they have beaten in a competition. Isn't it enough that you had a worthy adversary and you were forced to compete at a level you never thought you could reach, and that you did it without berating them and belittling them? True leaders, true champions do not trumpet their own accomplishments. And while you may brag today for a job well done, inevitably, there will come a day when you're at the short end of an outcome. At the end of the day, the things that make those great leaders come down to being willing to be of service to others, which is what is in this room. Arthur Ashe, the great tennis champion and humanitarian, wrote in 1994 in his book, Days of Grace, true heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost. So many people talk about the idea of servant leadership, and that is what Ashe was talking about in 1994. That idea is an idea I learned at home from people I've met along my life's journey, and certainly lessons from a visionary mother and father. Service and confidence are the essence of leadership. They are what creates inner excellence that you build over time. But as much time as it takes to build, it can be lost in a moment. True excellence, when it is attained, becomes so precious that it is esteemed and prized in a way that steels your spine to defend your honor against all. And that is where the heart of a great leader and the soul of a great leader is best. Now, I want to turn and pivot and talk a little bit about name, image, and likeness. So I know there's a lot of people have a lot of questions. Name, image, and likeness, whether we like it or not. And look, I'm old school. This is very foreign to everyone. It's strange. Lane Kiffin, the coach at Ole Miss, said NIL should stand for now it's legal. Because all the things that we are conditioned not to do, pay student athletes, give them money, all those things in college, this is now the new normal. But no one knows what the new normal, where it's going to settle. Unfortunately, 2.5, 3 years ago, when the state of California passed a law allowing this. The NCAA sat back and said, well, Congress will pass a law. We'll get them to pass a law. Now, all of us that live in America who aren't at the NCAA understand getting Congress to pass a law is not like something you go, okay, they're all going to agree on this. Okay. So they put their faith in that institution. That institution has bigger things to worry about than how student athletes get paid for using their name, image, and likeness. So the NCAA sat around and did nothing. Shortly after the law was passed, I was actually hired as a consultant with a group that was doing financial literacy at schools like Alabama and Georgia and Clemson and some other schools like that. They said, we want to make sure that the student athletes, as NIL comes around, we want to make sure that that they know how to handle this. They're not taken advantage of, that they understand what this now means. And we told them, look, they say they hired me. We spent a lot of time talking about this, hours and hours and hours, weeks and weeks and months. And we came up with the idea that we have to educate student athletes to protect them. Mom and dad, no matter what happens, when money shows up, people show up. And when money shows up, people who want to try and do things that aren't exactly ethical show up. And so we wanted them to be aware of what could happen, educated about what could happen, because NIL can be a great thing, even though it's new, even though we're old school, even though we look at it and say, well, why should these athletes get money? They're getting a free education. They're getting all these advantages. There's a lot of things it's doing very, very well. And back in January, all these, what they call collectives, are sprouting up all over the country. What a collective is essentially is a group of people get together and they raise money, and they are now hiring student athletes to do certain things. Okay. So Oregon has one. They're all over the place. Every school has one. Well, Penn State didn't have one. So we were at a little bit of a competitive disadvantage as related to recruiting, as related to retaining student athletes, because we did not have a collective setup. We did not have a mechanism to create NIL opportunities for Penn State student athletes. So Anthony Lebrano, who's another trustee at Penn State, a guy named Ben Bohm, a guy named Kerry Small, we started to have conversations. We started to put together a collective that we called Success with Honor. As fate would have it, there were a number of other people that were putting together financing. So we had the logistics and the infrastructure and all those things done. Other people had money. And with 3 kids in college, I don't have exactly a lot of disposable income laying around. I'm running my own kind of NIL with my 3 kids in college. We were able to kind of meld this thing together and create Success with Honor. And what we wanted to do was be different. We wanted to do it the Penn State way. We wanted to attract student athletes and retain student athletes that want to be at Penn State because we're different, because we value the student part of the student athlete, because we value success with honor in a way that Penn State fans can look at their student athletes and feel proud that they're associated with their institution. So that's what we created. But what we learned, there are 850 student athletes at Penn State. We have 31 sports. In those 31 sports, by NCAA rules, we can only award the equivalent of 377 full scholarships. Now, 125 of those scholarships roughly are full scholarships. The other 200, and now I'm going to do my math, so 125, 152-ish are split up among these other athletes. So the overwhelming majority of student athletes at Penn State are paying to play sports at Penn State. How many people are aware that we have a pretty good wrestling program? Okay. There are 9.9 full scholarships allotted to wrestling. Now, why not 10? Because it's the NCAA and that would make sense. But there are 9.9. There are 35 wrestlers on the roster. So start to do the math. So a national championship wrestler who's on a quarter scholarship, which is a pretty big number in wrestling, from out of state, is paying $37,000 to go to school at Penn State and wrestle for Penn State. And you can find that all over the place, whether it is women's lacrosse, women's field hockey, whether it's baseball, does not matter. the overwhelming majority of student athletes are paying to play at Penn State. So we said, you know what? This is a chance for us to help them. We're able to provide internships, stipends for internships. Maybe a student athlete has an internship at Goldman Sachs and it's unpaid. Well, you know what? We can create funds for internships. We can create all these opportunities for student athletes to lessen the burden on their families, on themselves, while they're competing for the school that we love. There's a lot of changes coming. You look at the new TV contracts in the Big Ten. You look at it, $7.88 billion. You're talking about a 12-team playoff in football. The TV networks were in the discussions. Okay, the conference commissioners, the presidents, the ADs were all discussing a 12-team playoff that's going to have football players playing 4 more games. You know what group wasn't at the table in that discussion? The players. Did anybody say, do you guys really want to play 4 more games? Because when you start looking at it, you're playing 12 regular season games, a Big Ten championship game, and now 4 more. Now you start to do the math. You're at 17 games. That's an NFL schedule. Sure, we all want to see a playoff. We all want to see it. I love it. But I'm not putting my knees or my head at risk to play the game. So there's going to be change. And a lot of these things are happening right now. And no one will say it out loud, but I will. A lot of these things are happening right now because what college athletics fears is revenue sharing. And if you look at the Supreme Court decision, there was a case, Alston case, where now that really opened the gates for NIL, opened the gates for a lot of things. Justice Kavanaugh, in a concurring opinion, stated of college athletics that in no other business in America would this business model be legal. So what he's saying is, if you bring us a revenue sharing case, you're going to win it. Everybody in the country knows it. So let's get the television contract done. Why do you see so many 10-year contracts for college football coaches right now? Because if we wall off that money and revenue sharing comes in 3 or 4 years, my money's protected. The agent is saying my commission on that contract is protected. Because in 3 or 4 years, if revenue sharing comes, you're not gonna be able to pay your head football coach $9 million, $10 million, because you're gonna need money to give to the guys who really matter. And I can tell you, all you guys that are Penn State fans, if Penn State and Ohio State, and Chris doesn't want to hear this, if Penn State and Ohio State are getting ready to play on Fox, and right before the game, all the players from Penn State and Ohio State say, you know what, till you pay us, we're not going to play because you're making a lot of money off us. Fox is not going to be real thrilled about airing a cornhole game between James Franklin and Ryan Day. As good as they may be, I don't know. I've never seen them play cornhole. Okay. And the 107, 108, 109,000 fans in the stands are going to go, okay, we can do this for about 5 minutes, but we got a good tailgate outside. So let's go out and enjoy that. It's coming. So with that, I'm going to open up for questions about anything you want, but I wanted to just try and address some of the NIL stuff that's going on out there right now. Okay. So I will, thank you. I will be sure to repeat the question. And if I don't, I'll know what the white light is. Who's got the button for the white light? Oh, wow. You guys aren't kidding around. Okay, let's go. Can I, that's okay. He wants me to comment on the changes to the transfer portal. For those who don't know, the NCAA is allowing student athletes to, before, if you transferred from one, Division 1A, well, it's now FBS school, to another one, you had to sit out a year before you can compete. Well, they changed that rule. And so it's become literally free agency every year. So when you're a head football coach right now, a head basketball coach, or it could be a lacrosse coach, doesn't matter. Any one of your athletes can transfer anywhere they want without having to sit out. So you are constantly trying to retain your roster. If I was the head of the NCAA, I would come up with there's a solution. I think the solution would be, if you're coming out of high school and you want the ability to transfer whenever you want, okay, you sign a 1-year scholarship. At the end of that year, you want to go, go. But at the end of the year, if the school wants you to go, then you got to go. It's up to them. So, because what's not being recognized right now on the student athlete side is the incredible amount of investment that goes into them from those schools. So you could have someone there for 2 years and you've had tutors and you've had, all these things that you've put into that athlete, and they can just turn around and walk away. So there's got to be, now, if you want to sign a 1-year deal, sign a 1-year deal. If you want to sign a 4-year deal, your transfer rules then will be a little bit more onerous. You can still transfer, but you've got to go through a more rigorous process and just saying, I'm out of here. But on the flip side, mom and dad are going to say, well, they're guaranteeing your scholarship for 4 years. You see a lot more families take that deal, and it would calm some of the transfer stuff down. But I'm not going to hold my breath for anything creative coming out of the NCAA. And, I'm not a big fan. Okay, the question is, I got you. What would I say to parents of football players that are coming up right now in this whole new world with NIL and transfer? What I would say is, number one, if you get recruited and you're fortunate enough to get recruited, pick a school where you want to go to college, because sports is not guaranteed. And if you don't like where you're going to school, you're not going to be as good as you can be on the field. Number two, as it relates to NIL, I would pump right now, NIL is now legal at the high school level in Pennsylvania. So that's going to open up a whole nother thing. But I think the most important thing for kids in high school, focus on your school, because the first thing colleges do, if they've got 5 or 6 guys that are really good football players and they're all in the same kind of group, okay, who are the best students? Because you're going to be able to get them in and they're going to be able to succeed. So pay attention to school, pay attention to your sport after that, and let the NIL stuff take care of itself. Because what we're seeing at the college level and the group that I've consulted with, they are at schools all over the country, including Notre Dame, Michigan State, Ohio State. They're doing some stuff with Penn State now, finally. The stress that it is putting on student athletes and the pressure from families to make money now is really high. And we're starting to see some mental health outcomes that aren't very positive, because they feel like I've got to cash in on this now, and it's going to start to impact how they play and how they go to school. So I would say make sure you're focused on those 3 things in that order would be the most important thing. So the question is Penn State, with a tradition of success with honor that we've had, are we still as committed to that as we were in the past? And I can tell you, Pat Kraft, our new AD, without a doubt, the thing he is telling student athletes, we want you to have the best student athlete experience in the country. And he stresses the student part of it. There's no question his leadership is going to be that way. Our new president, Neely Bendapudi, Dr. Neely Bendapudi, I think is very much aligned with that. They understand our history. They talk about our history, whereas not that we ever compromised the academic part of it, but there was a lot less talk about Penn State's history prior to 2012. in the last 7, 8 years because of some of the leaders at the university didn't think we should talk about it. That's not the case anymore. For those of you that were at the Ohio U game, you probably noticed there was a video played before the game, and it actually not only didn't shy away from it, it embraced our history. And if you're going to the game this weekend, get there in time to see it because it's a phenomenal video. But yeah, our leadership at our university is committed to that. And as a trustee, I can tell you at our level, no question that that will always remain.
People have an idea. How deep does NIL money go? You hear the dumb amounts of money that have been given to like quarterback going to Penn State, $8 million. How deep does that actually go? What number of athletes does that really do that?
The question is, how deep is the money really in NIL? What was it? That was the first part, right? How deep it goes? And how many students are really impacting? Well, look, what we say when we talk to schools about NIL, and when we talk about it, when I talk to other trustees about it, there's going to be a lot for a few and some for a lot. So you have a lot of athletes that are getting, you know, they have a certain presence on social media. So they say, hey, I just ate at, you know, such and such a place, and they tweet that, or they put it on Instagram or whatever social media platform they're on, and they'll get a certain amount of free food for that, or $50, $100, $200, $1,000, whatever it is. You're not the number that you're seeing. The kid from Tennessee, some of these deals are, it says $8 million, but $1 million is if you win the Heisman Trophy, you get $1 million. If you win the national championship, you get $1 million. If you win your conference, you get $500,000. And so really, when you start to break those things down, everybody thinks going to win the Heisman. Everybody thinks going to win the national championship. So they get these. But at the end of the day, the money is a lot less than you think. And what everybody thought was going to happen is you'd have all these national endorsement deals for college athletes. And what we've been telling people is there is no more valuable franchise, sports franchise in the country than the NFL, that league. How many NFL players have national endorsement deals? There's a handful. Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, you know, there's maybe 4 or 5 guys, maybe 6. The Mannings, who don't play anymore, have more deals than anybody. So, I mean, when you're looking at those big numbers, but what you have to be careful of is companies want a return on their investment. So if someone puts $1 million into a college football player's pocket, they're going to want to see more than $1 million in return. Now, the danger is you get a booster that owns a company who doesn't care about the return on investment, and he'll throw $1 million at a kid. And there's really no, but the law, state law here and the rules, there has to be fair market value. So you have to demonstrate that you did certain things to get that money. But I think it'll grow. But again, nobody is sure of where it starts and ends right now. And one of the reasons we started the collective that we started is we wanted to make sure that Penn State was not going to get in the business of bags of cash for recruits who did nothing for it. We wanted to make sure it was done the right way. And that's why going through our collective is, you know, there's a paper trail, there are documents, everything is documented. So if anybody comes in, we can show, you know, and we've helped, you know, our goal is to help all 31 sports. A number of wrestlers have benefited. We've had women's soccer players, women's volleyball players, football players certainly have benefited quite a bit. So, you know, whatever we can do to help this is what we're going to do. And it's just the way it is. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be around for a little bit if anybody wants to grab me. Thank you.
I know I'm very unpopular today in drawing this to a close, but we do want to be respectful of time. And I know that Jay is going to stick around and would be happy to speak individually with folks. Jay, I serve at York College. We have been undefeated in football for 2.5 centuries. But we're big Penn State fans here. We're all big fans. We're great fans of your father's. And I'm going to tell you something you already obviously know, I hope, and that is your father would be deeply, deeply proud of the man that you've become, the kind of leadership you're demonstrating in your own life, and that you're lifting up for communities like ours. Thank you again for being here today. In honor of Jay's visit with us today, he has signed the book plate in the book Epic Athletes. How appropriate is that? Simone Biles by Dan Wetzel, an appropriate choice. And this book will be presented to the Lincoln Charter School here in the city of York. Next week, we will hear from three multi-generational leaders from Penn Air. Headquartered in York, Penn Air will celebrate 54 years with us in December. The company helps people in manufacturing with pneumatics, hydraulics, and automation. Learn through stories shared by the family why Penn Air is different and how today Penn Air is working toward achieving its vision by staying true to their purpose and their core values. Our closing quote for the day. Winners, I am convinced, imagine their dreams first. They want it with all of their heart and expect it to come true. There is, I believe, no other way to live. Joe Montana. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.